Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Harry Potter is at the same time a carefully thought-out story full of hints and a chaotic fairy tale filled with cool but senseless moments. Some details Rowling changed on the fly, some she forgot, and some she never explained at all. Today I'll tell you about the oddities that still raise questions. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Short memory. Aunt Petunia is a character with extremely contradictory behavior. She knows about Dementors, Azkaban, Dumbledore, and even Snape, yet at the same time acts as if she has no clue about the basic rules of the wizarding world. Take Platform 934, for example. In the first book, the Dursleys look at Harry like he's insane when he mentions it, and at the station they even mock him, as if such a platform doesn't exist. Well, boy, here you are. There's Platform 9 and there's Platform 10. Your platform ought to be somewhere in between, but it looks like they haven't built it yet. But in Deathly Hallows we learn that Petunia had already been to this platform with Lily. Moreover, she should have known about the ban on underage magic. Yet in Chamber of Secrets she keeps quiet, even though she would have known this firsthand. And her line in the first book about Lily turning teacups into rats during summer holidays? That couldn't have been true. Students were strictly forbidden to do magic outside Hogwarts. Most likely, Petunia lied in a fit of emotion or mixed up her memories. Either way, it looks like a clear plot hole. Number 2. Life is boring without risk. The Death Eaters' attack at the Quidditch World Cup is a moment full of questions. Why would people who barely escaped Azkaban stage such a spectacle? The risk was colossal. Freedom, reputation, money, even their lives. Why couldn't the crowd of wizards, surely including skilled aurors, manage to capture even one of the attackers? Why did Barty Crouch Sr. and his people lounge around instead of securing the grounds with anti-disapparition charms? The whole scene looked as if pompous aristocrats had simply drunk themselves silly and decided to have some fun. But such fun could have ended in disaster. Number 3. Abuse of power. In Order of the Phoenix, Dolores Umbridge admits to Harry that she was the one who set the Dementors on him. But how was that even possible? Did the Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic fly off to Azkaban and persuade the Dementors to escape? Or did she send an official request, and how could she justify it? So either Dementors roam Britain without any supervision, or the Ministry was so rotten that no one noticed the disappearance of 2 of the most dangerous creatures in the wizarding world. Either way, the situation looks absurd. Number 4. Ancient traditions. The Triwizard Tournament itself is full of illogical details. It hadn't been held for centuries, yet wizards suddenly decided to revive all these old, sometimes absurd traditions. The Goblet of Fire automatically binds the champion to a magical contract. But why? And why doesn't it check whether the student actually entered their own name? What if Harry had accidentally died before the first task? Or if a champion had refused to participate after facing the dragon? Would the goblet have forced them to continue? And the most absurd part, the goblet was confused by outside interference and no one could do anything about it. Number 5. Accident. Finally, Cedric Diggory's death. The Ministry of Magic called it an accident. And this despite the fact that even schoolchildren knew the killing curse leaves too distinct a trace to be mistaken for anything else. Any investigation would have shown immediately that Cedric was murdered. Moreover, suspicion would have automatically fallen on Harry. He was there and even had a motive, but a simple wand check would have cleared things up. Why didn't the Ministry even attempt an investigation? The answer is simple. Fudge didn't want to admit Voldemort's return, so Barty Crouch Jr. was given the Dementor's kiss, the Dark Mark was ignored, and Cedric's death was covered up. But how was this explained to Cedric's parents? Did they really accept the accident story, or did they pin all the blame on Barty Crouch? Either way, one thing is clear. Cedric's death was never truly investigated. Number 6. The mystery of the unbroken ring. When Dumbledore slips Marvolo Gaunt's ring onto his finger, it is not ignorance but choice. He knows Horcruxes are deadly. He knows curses of Voldemort are designed to kill. Yet in Half-Blood Prince, Harry sees the mark spreading. On his blackened hand he wore a ring with a cracked stone, and the curse was creeping up his arm. Dumbledore, the man who planned everything with such precision, allows himself a reckless mistake. The reason seems painfully human. Inside that cursed ring lies the Resurrection Stone, a chance to see Ariana, his sister, lost in childhood. For a brief moment the great wizard crumbles under grief. But the cost is staggering. The curse dooms him, Snape is forced to contain it, and the timeline of his death is set. All of the Order's strategy, all of Harry's preparation is reshaped by this single weakness. Dumbledore's brilliance collides with his deepest wound, and for once, emotion outweighs reason. Perhaps that is why Rowling leaves the scene so raw. The fall of the greatest wizard begins not with Voldemort's wand, but with Dumbledore's own longing, a fleeting desire that risks everything he swore to protect. Number 7. Where did the Aurors go? The Quidditch World Cup riot is the first glaring absence. Death Eaters march through the campsite, terrorizing Muggles, setting tents ablaze. Panic spreads like wildfire. And yet the Aurors, supposedly the elite defenders of Wizarding Britain, are nowhere to be seen until it is too late. Arthur Weasley and a handful of Ministry officials stumble about, but the attackers vanish unharmed. Ministry wizards were dashing about trying to calm the panic, but the masked and hooded wizards had already disapparated. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. If this was the greatest magical police force in the country, why were they powerless against drunken thugs in masks? The silence is even stranger when Voldemort rises. In the Battle of Hogwarts, the defense falls to teachers, students, and the Order of the Phoenix. Where are the Aurors who trained for decades to fight dark magic? Kingsley Shacklebolt appears, but mostly as a lone fighter, rather than the leader of a strike team. Even when Voldemort storms the Ministry itself, the resistance collapses almost instantly. It feels as though the Aurors, supposedly Britain's shield, exist only on paper, buried in files and bureaucracy, while the true fight is left to children and a few desperate volunteers. Number 8. Harry's strange broomstick. Harry's first broom arrives like a dream come true. McGonagall herself delivers the Nimbus 2000, a gift arranged quietly after his first flying lesson. Professor McGonagall told Harry that he would be playing on the team, and she handed him a long, thin package wrapped in brown paper. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. A brand new broom worth a fortune lands in the hands of an 11-year-old, and nobody questions where it came from. The teachers cheer, the students gape in envy, and Harry is swept into glory. But safety, caution, they vanish into thin air. The strangeness grows in Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry receives the firebolt. This time, suspicion does flicker. The gift is anonymous, and Sirius Black, the supposed murderer, lurks in the shadows. McGonagall confiscates the broom for inspection, but nothing dangerous is found, and then just like that the matter is dropped. A broom that could have been hexed to kill him is handed back without fear. Harry got his firebolt back, and the team roared with delight. Trust replaces reason, as if one brief glance is enough to banish all doubt. The risk should have been obvious. Voldemort's followers had countless ways to curse objects. If Tom Riddle's diary could possess Ginny Weasley, why couldn't a broom carry a curse straight into Harry's veins? The teachers of Hogwarts, the Ministry, even Dumbledore himself, none of them seemed troubled. They let a boy ride gifts from unknown senders into the skies. It is one of the clearest examples of how the adults in Harry's world, distracted by tradition and hero worship, leave him unguarded against dangers they should have seen coming. Number 9. The Vanishing Witnesses. When Voldemort rises again in the graveyard at Little Hangleton, the event is grand and terrifying. He regains his body through a dark ritual, calling his Death Eaters to witness his return. Yet afterward, only Harry survives to tell the tale. Cedric Diggory is killed. Wormtail vanishes into hiding. Not one Death Eater dares to speak. The Ministry demands proof, but there is none beyond Harry's word. "He's back. Voldemort is back," Harry cries, but Fudge shakes his head in denial. A moment that should have had dozens of witnesses becomes a story that no one believes. Happens again with the prophecy. Locked away in the Department of Mysteries, it shatters in Harry's hand. Dumbledore later explains, "Only I and you know its full meaning, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix." How convenient that this knowledge rests in the mouths of only two people, one of whom dies before the final battle. If the prophecy was so crucial, why wasn't it copied, studied, or at least entrusted to others in the Order? Once more, the truth narrows to a single fragile witness, as though the story itself is stripping away voices until only Harry remains. Even the setting of Little Hangleton raises questions. A village that's small would surely have heard whispers. Old Frank Bryce, the caretaker, suspects trouble in the Riddle House and pays for it with his life. Rowling writes, "The villagers still called it the Riddle House, though it stood empty." Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Strange lights, sounds of chanting, and unexplained deaths should have drawn attention. Yet no one else reports a thing. The world is silent, witnesses vanish, and history folds itself into secrecy. It is as if Voldemort's power is not only fear, but the eerie ability to erase every voice but Harry's. Number 10. Inconvenient laws of magic. The rules about underage magic seem clear at first glance. No spells outside school, but the moment Harry is accused in the Chamber of Secrets, everything unravels. Dobby smashes the pudding in the Dursleys' kitchen with a hover charm, yet the Ministry sends Harry a letter. "Harry Potter, you have received an official warning for use of magic outside school." The boy never touched his wand. The Ministry knew magic was performed in that house, but they pinned it on him without question. This inconsistency grows sharper later. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Aunt Marge swells up like a balloon after Harry loses control. Again, the Ministry knows exactly where it happened, yet they act with a bizarre double standard. Instead of expelling him, Cornelius Fudge waves the whole thing away. "Accidents happen. We don't send students to Azkaban for a bit of accidental magic." The same government that punished a levitating pudding forgives an inflated muggle. It seems the law is not about justice but convenience. If the Ministry cannot tell who casts the spell, then their surveillance system is hopelessly flawed. But if they can identify the caster, then why was Dobby never mentioned? Why wasn't Creature investigated when he insulted Harry at Grimmauld Place, or Winky when she caused chaos at the Quidditch World Cup? Either the Ministry ignores house elves entirely, or it chooses to look the other way when the culprit is not a registered wizard. In both cases, the system breaks down. The deeper question is why Harry alone becomes the target. Each warning letter, each threat of expulsion, isolates him further. It is as if the Ministry bends its laws to intimidate him. Dolores Umbridge later proves this in Order of the Phoenix, dragging Harry to trial for a simple Patronus. The hypocrisy is blatant. A boy saving his cousin from Dementors is treated as a criminal, while the real criminals slip by unnoticed. In the end, the laws of underage magic look less like protection and more like a weapon of control. Number 11. Invisible Muggles. Diagon Alley is introduced as if it were hidden in plain sight. Behind a brick wall at the Leaky Cauldron, he saw a small, narrow door, and suddenly he was facing a bustling street filled with witches and wizards. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The magic is dazzling, but how can thousands of witches and wizards pour in and out of this entrance every year without a single muggle noticing? London is crowded. Someone would have seen cloaked figures pressing bricks, then vanishing through solid walls. Even Vernon Dursley, who worked in Grunnings on the very same street, never once reported the odd sight. The strangeness deepens with Hogwarts itself. A vast Scottish castle rising in the Highlands should attract hikers, photographers, and historians. Rowling explains it away. To Muggles, the castle looks like a ruin with a danger sign nailed on the gate. But even ruins invite attention. Wouldn't some curious student from Edinburgh take a bus, hike into the hills, and sketch the mysterious site? Wouldn't archaeologists dig into its history? For centuries, no one seems to question the gap on the map where a massive fortress should stand. Think about the Quidditch World Cup. Tens of thousands of wizards flood a field in southern England, tents sprouting overnight. Arthur Weasley struggles to talk about Muggle money and camping rules, yet the entire spectacle is hidden with a few charms. Wizards are pouring in every hour and Muggles are none the wiser, Ludo Bagman boasts. But can a magical field charm really mask a stadium the size of Wembley? A farmer, a plane, a tourist with binoculars, surely someone would have noticed. The illusion strains under its own weight. The books want us to believe in a clean separation of worlds, but cracks show everywhere. When Dudley meets Dementors in Order of the Phoenix, Harry barely convinces him to keep silent. One word to Petunia or Vernon, and the entire Dursley family might have shouted the truth to the neighbourhood. Wizards erase memories when convenient, but if thousands of Muggles stumble on strange sights every year, the Ministry of Magic would need an army of obliviators working non-stop. Perhaps that is the hidden tragedy, a secret world maintained not by wonder, but by relentless lies and erased lives. Number 12. The Phoenix Problem. Fawkes is more than a bird. He is a miracle that walks through the pages of the books. His tears saved Harry in the Chamber of Secrets, when basilisk venom was already burning through his veins. Rowling writes, thick, pearly tears were trickling down the golden feathers onto Harry's wound. It was strangely painless. He could feel it healing. That moment proves Fawkes can cure what no wizard could. Yet after this scene, the bird's gift almost vanishes from the story, as if the author herself feared what such power could mean for the plot. Think of how many lives could have been saved if Dumbledore had let Fawkes soar over the battlefields. Remus Lupin mauled by Fenrir Greyback, Bill Weasley scarred for life, countless unnamed fighters who fell in the Battle of Hogwarts. None of them saw a single healing tear. Why was Harry chosen to receive this blessing while others were left to die? Was it chance, or Dumbledore's silent command to his phoenix? The silence around this question feels louder than any answer. And Fawkes could do even more. He carried Dumbledore away in a burst of flame when Aurors came to arrest him. He flew across great distances, untouched by chains or curses. Why, then, did the Order not use him to move secret allies or to rescue prisoners from Azkaban? Sirius Black escaped on a hippogriff, but with Fawkes, such a mission would have been swifter and safer. It seems impossible that Dumbledore would ignore such an advantage unless Rowling herself decided to set limits. The truth is clear. Fawkes was too powerful. He could heal, transport, and inspire. He could have changed the war. That is why, after the Chamber of Secrets, his role shrinks to a few appearances. Rowling gives him glory and then takes it away. It makes us wonder whether the great battles of the story might have looked very different if the Phoenix had spread his wings just a little wider. Number 13. The Horcrux Mystery. Of all the mysteries hidden within J.K. Rowling's saga, the Horcruxes remain among the most perplexing. They are at once the centerpiece of Voldemort's immortality and the driving quest of the final chapters, yet their existence raises haunting questions that the narrative never fully explains. The books make clear that Horcruxes emit a dark and unsettling energy, a presence that corrodes the spirit and gnaws at the mind, and yet for decades no one seemed to notice them. If even a Muggle wearing Salazar Slytherin's locket could grow irritable and violent, what prevented sharp and seasoned wizards from sensing the malignancy in their midst? The oddity becomes starker when we remember where some Horcruxes were hidden. Not locked in the depths of shadowy caves, but displayed in semi-public spaces where others had the chance to encounter them. Consider the diary of Tom Riddle, discovered by Ginny Weasley in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This object was hardly buried away in an inaccessible vault. It was slipped to a young girl through Lucius Malfoy's casual cruelty, as though it were no more dangerous than an old schoolbook. The diary consumed Ginny's mind, drained her will, and nearly killed her. Rowling writes, Ginny poured her soul into the diary, and the diary poured a little of his soul back into her. That exchange, with its vampiric intimacy, demonstrates how violently the object interacted with a living host. And yet, no one before Ginny appeared to notice anything unusual about the diary. Lucius himself, a practiced wizard immersed in the politics of the dark arts, did not seem affected in the same way. This inconsistency highlights the strangeness of Horcruxes. They are simultaneously toxic to those who touch them, and yet invisible to the scrutiny of many. The locket is perhaps the most striking example. Introduced in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, it appears briefly in the clutter of 12 Grimmauld Place, mixed among the dusty relics of the Black family's collection. Later, when Harry, Ron and Hermione carry it on their journey, the locket grows oppressive, bending their emotions toward anger and suspicion. Rowling observes, the locket lay against their skin and the wearers felt a tightening in their chests as if the very air around them had thickened. Even Creature the house elf, no stranger to dark magic, spoke of it with a bitterness born from years of contact. And yet for the longest time, none of the Order of the Phoenix recognized the item for what it was. Did Sirius, Alastor Moody, or even Dumbledore never sense its malignant aura? The scene raises unsettling doubts about the limits of magical perception. Dumbledore, of all people, seems like the wizard least likely to overlook such artifacts. His brilliance in unraveling Voldemort's past and tracing the trail of Horcruxes was nearly unmatched. He located Marvolo Gaunt's ring, destroyed it at great personal cost, and pieced together the scattered evidence of Riddle's fragmented soul. And yet one must ask, why did this great mind not detect the locket when it sat for years in the very house he had claimed as headquarters for the Resistance? The same question applies to Helga Hufflepuff's cup secured inside Gringotts. Surely goblins, famed for their sensitivity to enchanted objects, might have raised alarm at its unnatural energy. Yet the cup rested in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault for years, undisturbed. The contrast between what the books describe and what the logic of the story suggests cannot be ignored. When Harry and his friends wear the locket, its effect is overwhelming. Ron's outburst during their exile illustrates the destructive influence. He thought he could see Hermione and Harry together, laughing at him, mocking him, betraying him. The Horcrux twisted his perception until he abandoned his friends. This is not a subtle enchantment. It is invasive, psychological warfare pressed into jewelry. And still, how could generations of skilled witches and wizards walk past similar objects without recognizing that something was deeply wrong? Rowling does provide glimpses of answers, though they are subtle. Perhaps Horcruxes only reveal their poison to those who are vulnerable, to those whose minds are already cracked by fear, loneliness, or doubt. Ginny, isolated and insecure, fell prey to the diary. Ron, anxious about his place beside Harry, succumbed to the locket's whispers. In this reading, Dumbledore's vast self-assurance, his clarity of mind, may have shielded him from immediate harm. Still, the explanation feels incomplete because the objects are described as inherently radiating darkness, not merely as amplifiers of existing weakness. The question extends to Voldemort himself. Tom Riddle was no fool. His cunning was his most lethal weapon. Yet he placed Horcruxes in locations that now seem dangerously accessible. A diary entrusted to Lucius Malfoy, a ring left in his ancestral shack, a locket kept in a seaside cave, protected by enchantments but not by secrecy alone. If Horcruxes truly glowed with darkness, surely Voldemort would have recognized the risk. Why would he not encase them in deeper wards or camouflage them more convincingly? Perhaps his arrogance blinded him. Perhaps he assumed that because no one dared to pursue him, no one would ever look too closely at what he left behind. In Voldemort's hubris lies one possible answer. He simply could not imagine that others would outwit him. It is also worth recalling the strange case of Harry himself, the accidental Horcrux. For years, those around him sensed that something unusual connected him to Voldemort. Snape described his connection to the Dark Lord's mind with suspicion. Dumbledore alone understood the truth, piecing together the boy's scar and the failed killing curse. Yet Harry's friends, who spent every day with him, never felt the taint of a Horcrux emanating from their companion. Why did Hermione or Ron not shiver with unease as they did when carrying the locket? The inconsistency suggests that Horcruxes might vary in their potency, that some throb with malevolence while others lie dormant until provoked. Number 14. Training that never happened. Of all the peculiarities within the Harry Potter series, one of the most puzzling is the absence of any serious preparation for Harry, even though the adults around him know he will one day have to face Lord Voldemort. From the very beginning, fate pushes him into encounters with the Dark Lord, and, remarkably, each time Harry survives. In his first year at Hogwarts, he manages to thwart Voldemort's attempt to seize the Philosopher's Stone. Yet he does so not through carefully honed magical skill, but by sheer instinct, aided by the protection of his mother's sacrifice. The narrative makes it clear when Dumbledore explains, "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love." This truth carries immense weight, but it also highlights how dependent Harry's survival is on forces outside his training. The fact that no one attempts to build upon this moment by guiding him into structured preparation sets a strange precedent. The Chamber of Secrets provides a second encounter, and once again Harry's victory arises from circumstances he could never have engineered. When he faces Tom Riddle and the Basilisk, his success relies almost entirely on Fawkes bringing the Sorting Hat and the Sword of Godric Gryffindor. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," Dumbledore later tells him, a line meant to encourage. But the deeper issue is left untouched. Choices alone cannot stop a Dark Lord who commands armies of Death Eaters and mastery of the dark arts. By this stage, Harry has twice survived lethal confrontations, yet he remains a boy learning ordinary charms and transfigurations, never given specialized lessons in defensive or offensive magic that might prepare him for the reality everyone knows is coming. The third year intensifies the pattern. Harry's strongest spells, particularly the Patronus he conjures against Dementors, emerge only through his own desperation. Lupin offers guidance, but even that is narrowly focused and lasts only a few lessons. The importance of this training is undeniable, as the Patronus becomes one of Harry's defining defenses. Still, Lupin disappears at the end of the year, and with him any continuity. No effort is made by the school or by Dumbledore to institutionalize this critical progress. Harry turns to classes where exams matter more than preparing a student destined to face the darkest wizard of the age. It raises the haunting question, why does no one recognize the urgency of his situation and provide long-term mentorship? When Voldemort fully returns in the graveyard during the Triwizard Tournament, the inadequacy of Harry's training becomes glaring. Forced into a duel with the most dangerous wizard alive, Harry barely escapes by the miracle of Priori Incantatem, a rare magical phenomenon triggered by the shared cause of their wands. Voldemort himself sneers at Harry's lack of skill, expecting to crush him with ease. The irony is that the only reason Harry lives is not his own ability, but the spectral intervention of his parents and others, who momentarily shield him. This encounter should have triggered immediate recognition among the adults that Harry needed to be systematically trained. Yet what follows is not a structured regimen, but continued secrecy and half measures. In the fifth book, the strange absence of preparation becomes impossible to ignore. The Ministry of Magic actively undermines Harry, treating him as a liar. Dolores Umbridge, sent to Hogwarts, ensures that students are deliberately deprived of practical defense against the dark arts lessons. This forces Harry into the extraordinary position of taking on the responsibility himself. "If you want to know what it's like to face him, then I can tell you," Harry insists when forming Dumbledore's army. It is a remarkable turning point, but it also underscores the negligence of the whole. Adults. A 15-year-old boy should not have to organize secret lessons because the institution responsible for his safety refuses to act. The training provided by Dumbledore's army is both inspiring and tragic. Students learn real defensive spells, Expelliarmus, Stupefy, Patronuses, skills that they will later need in the Battle of Hogwarts. They flourish under Harry's guidance, and the camaraderie strengthens them. Yet the fact remains that this group exists because the official structures failed. Dumbledore himself, though supportive in spirit, never directly intervenes to prepare Harry. Instead, he continues to withhold information. His words to Harry late in the book, "You must know everything, you must know it all," arrive only after Sirius has died and after Harry has endured. Another near-fatal clash with Voldemort. The timing is not protective, it is reactive. The paradox is most visible in Dumbledore's choices. He is the only wizard Voldemort ever feared, yet he refrains from openly training Harry. His reasoning, revealed later, involves his belief that Harry's innocence must be preserved, that the burden of prophecy should not crush him too soon. While this may sound noble, it ignores the reality that Voldemort is not waiting. Harry faces mortal peril year after year. By withholding knowledge and preparation, Dumbledore places Harry at greater risk, relying on hope, chance, and the loyalty of his friends to keep him alive. Readers are left to wrestle with whether this was wisdom or negligence disguised as strategy. Even figures who might have supported Harry, Sirius Black for instance, fail to provide meaningful guidance. Sirius clings to Harry as a reminder of James, treating him more like a peer than a student needing mentorship. His advice is often coloured by recklessness, such as encouraging Harry to take risks simply to assert his bravery. Sirius longs for the battles of old, but he does not step into the role of a teacher. This lack of guidance leaves Harry once more dependent on instinct and luck. The tragedy of Sirius's death reinforces the sense that every adult who could have guided Harry instead fails him at crucial moments. Number 15. Voldemort's chessboard. Of all the curious twists in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the strangest remains the final sequence leading to the hidden treasure, the moment when Harry, Ron, and Hermione must pass through a series of enchantments to reach the stone. What was presented as an elaborate magical defense by Hogwarts' most powerful professors turned out to be nothing more than a set of riddles, challenges, and games that 3 first-year students could pass with determination and a little ingenuity. The supposed guardians of one of the most dangerous objects in the wizarding world had crafted tests so oddly accessible that the entire scenario reads less like a serious protection and more like a carefully staged initiation. It is no accident that the book itself acknowledges this, as Harry notices. It was like it was all meant to be a test for them. The words resonate like an echo of a larger mystery, suggesting that Albus Dumbledore may have intended the children's involvement from the beginning. The strangest element of all is the giant chessboard. Set by Professor McGonagall, it was an enchantment designed to challenge intruders, but its design feels out of place in the face of true, dark magic. The enchantment could indeed be perilous, for as Ron discovered when he took the place of a knight, one wrong move meant brutal magical attacks from the enchanted pieces. Yet even with this danger, the logic of the puzzle was childish compared to the schemes of Voldemort. Did Dumbledore and his staff really believe that a determined wizard like Quirrell, manipulated by the Dark Lord, would be permanently blocked by a board game? The danger was real, but the intellectual depth of the task was shallow. This contradiction leaves the impression that the chess match was never intended for Quirrell at all, but for the children who followed. The same pattern appears in Snape's riddle with the potions. At first glance it seemed clever, a logical test that required deduction rather than brute magical strength, but Hermione solved it with ease, using her intellect and calm reasoning. The wording of the puzzle is explicitly structured to favor someone like her, with a mind trained to think logically in a world of wizards who often dismissed logic as unimportant. Again, what kind of deterrent would this be for an adult wizard like Quirrell? He was, after all, a fully trained professor in possession of dark arts knowledge. A riddle with neatly lined-up bottles hardly seems like a serious barrier to someone operating under the guidance of Lord Voldemort. Then there was Hagrid's contribution, the three-headed dog named Fluffy. A terrifying beast, yes, but one neutralized with a simple trick: music. Harry, Ron, and Hermione solved it almost by accident, overhearing Hagrid's careless hint that music put the dog to sleep. Here lies another contradiction. Was it reasonable to entrust the safety of the stone to Hagrid, whose love for magical creatures always exceeded his discretion? If the safety of the wizarding world truly depended on Fluffy, Dumbledore was playing a reckless game. The vulnerability was so glaring that the children passed without difficulty, while Voldemort in Quirrell's body required no effort at all to bypass it. The entire setup feels suspiciously like a staged obstacle course designed not to stop a Dark Lord, but to test the courage and resourcefulness of children. Consider also Professor Sprout's Devil's Snare. The plant was lethal for those who panicked, but harmless if approached with knowledge and calm. Hermione solved it instantly, reminding Ron and Harry to relax. The symbolism is striking. The plant functioned as a lesson in composure under pressure, not as a fortress against evil. For Quirrell, this was nothing. A wizard with mastery over fire could destroy the plant in an instant. Yet for the trio, it became the perfect moment to demonstrate their teamwork. Again, the enchantment was less a defense and more a moral and practical exercise. The pattern repeats with Quirrell's own troll. This was the very creature he had already demonstrated control over earlier in the year. To place such a monster in his own sequence of defenses is absurd, if viewed as genuine protection. It could never have stopped him, but it certainly could frighten and test the mettle of young students. That night in the dungeons, Harry and Ron had learned how to confront a troll with courage, and now they faced the echo of that lesson in the final chamber. The circularity suggests orchestration, as though Dumbledore wanted the children to confront a memory of their own growth. Even the flying keys designed by Flitwick appear suspiciously tailored. Harry, who excelled at Quidditch, was the perfect candidate to spot the correct key and chase it through the air. The entire task reads less like a trap for dark wizards and more like a personal test of Harry's unique skill. The enchanted keys swarmed the air, and only someone with a seeker's reflexes could capture the right one. For Quirrell, the task was an annoyance at most. For Harry, it was a validation of identity, almost a magical affirmation of his destiny. Each chamber, when examined individually, reveals the same conclusion. The enchantments were not protective barriers, but a curriculum of tests aimed at children. In isolation, each task can be excused. Together, they form a pattern that is too deliberate to ignore. Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, could not have been so naive as to believe that Fluffy, flying keys, or a riddle with bottles would deter Voldemort. Instead, he appears to have created an environment where Harry would be forced to meet Voldemort face to face, armed only with courage, loyalty, and a little bit of skill. Number 16, the strange portkeys. Of all the curiosities in the wizarding world, few are as perplexing as the mysterious portals that transport witches and wizards across vast distances. These gateways, whether in the form of the Floo network portkeys or apparition, appear at first to be marvels of magical engineering, practical solutions to travel in a hidden society. Yet the closer one looks, the more the system reveals inconsistencies and oddities that leave the reader questioning the very logic of J.K. Rowling's carefully woven world. The portkey stands out as the strangest of all, a magical object so simple in appearance yet so powerful in effect, and the inconsistencies surrounding its use raise troubling questions about safety, control, and intent. When Harry first experiences a portkey in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the magic is presented almost casually, as if it were a common means of transportation. Arthur Weasley, along with Amos and Cedric Diggory, escorts Harry, Ron, and Hermione up a wind-swept hill at dawn, where a battered old boot lies in the grass. It is described as an old, boot-shaped object lying on the ground, apparently discarded and harmless. Yet within moments, the children clutch it and are swept away in a dizzying whirl, landing on the hillside near the Quidditch World Cup Stadium. The scene is written with vivid detail. Harry felt as though a hook, just behind his navel, had been yanked irresistibly forward. His feet left the ground, he could no longer feel them. A spell hidden in plain sight transports them hundreds of miles. The question arises almost instantly: if such powerful magic can be bound to any everyday object, why are wizarding children allowed to touch it so casually? Arthur Weasley himself explains that muggles must not stumble upon these items, yet the old boot is left lying openly in the field, visible to anyone who wanders by. It's just too risky to have too many of these lying around, you see. They can transport anyone, anywhere, Mr. Weasley mutters. Yet the Ministry still relies on this method to funnel crowds of witches and wizards to the cup. This paradox leaves the reader wondering how a society obsessed with secrecy and order permits such dangerous items to exist without constant supervision. The larger problem is inconsistency. In the fourth book, portkeys seem to be everywhere. They are used to move entire groups, timed for precision, and organized to the point that families across Britain converge on hillsides and meadows, each object enchanted for a specific hour. But later in the series, portkeys all but vanish, suddenly subject to the tightest restrictions of the Ministry of Magic. During the war against Voldemort, such items would be invaluable for escape and rescue, yet their absence is noticeable. When Dumbledore takes Harry to the cave in Half-Blood Prince, he conjures transportation by other means, leaving the reader to ask why the Ministry, or Dumbledore himself, does not simply produce a portkey to bypass danger. The inconsistency becomes even stranger when viewed in light of Barty Crouch Jr.'s manipulation of the Triwizard Tournament. The climax of Goblet of Fire hinges on a portkey disguised as the Triwizard Cup, enchanted to deliver Harry directly into Voldemort's hands. That such a spell could be cast without oversight within the grounds of Hogwarts itself undermines the idea that portkeys are monitored. Crouch Jr., posing as Mad-Eye Moody, creates a lethal trap under the nose of the Ministry and Albus Dumbledore. This implies that either portkeys are absurdly easy to enchant, or that the Ministry lacks the ability to detect them. Either conclusion is unsettling. The danger is evident when one remembers how Harry describes the experience. He felt his feet slam the ground, and his knees nearly buckled under him. He stumbled, still clutching the cup, and looked around. They were standing in a dark and overgrown graveyard. A school competition becomes the means of a death sentence. The simplicity of enchanting the cup exposes a terrifying gap in magical lore. If a Death Eater could do this, what stopped anyone else from leaving cursed objects in the path of unsuspecting children? Arthur Weasley's earlier warning rings hollow in hindsight. He claims that the Ministry must carefully manage portkeys to avoid muggles misusing them, yet the real danger is not a muggle stumbling across one, but a wizard exploiting the loophole. The Triwizard Cup proves that no effective regulation exists. By the logic of the wizarding world, a first year who studied a complex enough charm could, in theory, create one. The risk of abductions, smuggling, or even worse crimes becomes obvious. And yet there is no legislation, no Auror or task force explicitly patrolling for illegal portkeys in the story. The strange absence of portkeys in later books adds weight to the mystery. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione escape the Ministry of Magic in Deathly Hallows, They do not use a portkey. They disapparate under pressure, pursued and hunted. Why does no one in the Order of the Phoenix suggest handing each member a safe portkey as an emergency exit? The omission feels deliberate, as if Rowling herself realized that the device undermined narrative tension. A simple enchanted trinket could nullify entire plots, such as the entrapment at Malfoy Manor or the infiltration of Gringotts. But if the explanation is narrative necessity, then the internal logic of the magical world collapses. Equally peculiar is how portkeys differ from apparition. Apparition is dangerous, requiring training and licensing, with the ever-present risk of splinching the traveller. Yet portkeys seem effortless, safe for children, and scalable to large groups. Why then is apparition the focus of magical transport in the later books, while portkeys fade into the background? One would expect parents to rely on portkeys constantly for their children, particularly in times of war. The fact that the Weasleys only use them for the World Cup and never again suggests either an authorial oversight or a gap in wizarding lore never explained to the reader. The most revealing example lies in Dumbledore's actions. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry and the Weasleys are escorted to the Ministry for Harry's trial, Arthur Weasley insists on travelling by Floo network, despite the inconvenience. Why not provide Harry with a portkey? Surely the Ministry could have arranged one for punctuality and security. The absence speaks volumes. Portkeys exist when convenient to the plot, but vanish when they would make things too simple. One cannot ignore the symbolism either. The portkey is not merely a tool of transport, but a metaphor for fate. It drags Harry against his will into Voldemort's world, a violent reminder that destiny pulls him regardless of his choices. But this poetic function does not erase the practical question. Why allow such dangerous magic to exist freely? Even Dumbledore admits in Goblet of Fire that the cup had been turned into a portkey without his knowledge, proof of how easily safeguards can be breached. The laws of the wizarding world, so often cited as strict and bureaucratic, crumble in this instance. The Ministry carefully regulates wands, broomsticks, and even underage magic, yet permits objects capable of international abductions to sit openly in fields. The absurdity becomes striking when one recalls Arthur Weasley's position in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. His entire career revolves around confiscating enchanted teapots and trick combs, yet his children clutch a boot that can fling them hundreds of miles without a second thought. In light of this, one must wonder whether portkeys are intentionally suppressed by the Ministry in later years. Perhaps Voldemort's return frightened officials into restricting them, fearing infiltration and sabotage, but if so, why does Rowling never tell us? The silence only deepens the sense that the portkey is a dangling thread in the tapestry of the story, a device conjured for spectacle at the Quidditch World Cup and for tragedy at the graveyard, but abandoned when it threatened to unravel the rest of the plot. The inconsistency leaves a haunting impression. The old boot on the hill, the shining cup in the maze, the tug at Harry's navel, each moment is unforgettable. Yet behind the wonder lies a nagging unease, a sense that the wizarding world lives with a vulnerability never fully acknowledged. Portkeys remain the great paradox of the Harry Potter saga, powerful, dangerous, and strangely ignored. They are a riddle left unsolved, a magical tool that both expanded the world and fractured its logic, raising more questions than they ever answered. Number 17, Powerless Teachers. In the vast halls of Hogwarts, the teachers are introduced as paragons of magical mastery, guardians of tradition, and scholars of unrivaled wisdom. Yet when danger strikes, they often become shadows of their supposed power. Readers notice this odd imbalance. The professors who should be pillars of protection for their students frequently appear ineffective, helpless, or even blind to the obvious. It creates a strange paradox in J.K. Rowling's narrative world. Hogwarts is described as the finest school of witchcraft and wizardry in the world. Yet, when crises unfold, it is Harry Potter and his young companions who take the lead, while the adults retreat to the background. This pattern deserves careful reflection, for it not only shapes the drama of the story but also reveals one of its strangest flaws. Consider the second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The school is plagued by a mysterious monster that petrifies students. Albus Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, Severus Snape, and the rest of the staff seem unable to make any progress in identifying the creature. The only real action they take is to urge calm and send children back to their dormitories. As McGonagall orders during one of the attacks, students, return to your dormitories immediately. It is a response more appropriate to a fire drill than a magical catastrophe. Meanwhile, the answer to the mystery, a basilisk moving through the plumbing, lay hidden in plain sight, hinted at in legend, in the words of Hagrid, and even in the strange behavior of spiders. None of the professors, with all their training, seemed capable of piecing the clues together. Instead, it is Harry and Ron, mere 12-year-olds, who follow the trail and discover the truth. This lack of adult competence becomes even more striking when one remembers how powerful these figures are supposed to be. Severus Snape is a skilled legilimens and potions master. Phileas Flitwick was a dueling champion in his youth. McGonagall is a renowned transfiguration expert and a capable leader, yet when the basilisk roams the school they appear paralyzed, reacting only after the fact. Even the presence of a defense against the dark arts professor, Gilderoy Lockhart, turns into a cruel joke. His reputation is vast, his books fill shelves, but in reality he is a fraud who cowers when true danger emerges. The contrast is unsettling. Children save the school while teachers appear powerless. The same narrative pattern repeats itself with Peter Pettigrew. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Pettigrew lives for years inside the castle in the form of Ron Weasley's pet rat, Scabbers. This is no ordinary intruder. This is a dangerous Death Eater, an animagus wanted for betrayal and murder. Yet the entire staff of Hogwarts, including some of the most perceptive witches and wizards alive, fail to notice. They never question the presence of a rat that lives unnaturally long. They never scan the pets for enchantments. Even Remus Lupin, who should have recognized his old friend's animagus form, does not. Suspect the truth until the moment of revelation in the Shrieking Shack. That Harry, Hermione, and Ron are the ones to unveil the rat's secret adds to the sense that the adults are less guardians than bystanders. The betrayal of Pettigrew reveals something deeper. Hogwarts is not simply vulnerable to external threats, but incapable of policing its own walls. Albus Dumbledore, often depicted as a mastermind, does not detect the rat or sense the danger. This blind spot feels intentional in Rowling's narrative, but it underscores the recurring theme that Hogwarts professors, despite their reputations, are ineffective when vigilance is required. The very idea that a murderer could walk in the halls disguised as a child's pet without raising suspicion diminishes the credibility of the tall school as a bastion of safety. Even in The Philosopher's Stone, the first book, the pattern is established. The professors create a series of magical protections to guard the stone: a giant three-headed dog, enchanted keys, dangerous plants, logic puzzles, and mirrors. Yet somehow, 3 first-year students manage to bypass these protections. Hermione Granger solves the logic riddle, Harry mounts a broom and catches the flying key, Ron plays wizard chess. These accomplishments make the children admirable, but they also raise uncomfortable questions. If the protections can be overcome by children after one evening of effort, what does this say about the supposed brilliance of the adults who designed them? The answer seems obvious. The story required children to triumph, so the teachers were written as fallible, blind, or careless. The Triwizard Tournament in the Goblet of Fire magnifies the problem. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, infiltrates Hogwarts for nearly a year. He manipulates the competition, places Harry's name in the goblet, and steers events toward Voldemort's resurrection. None of the teachers, not even Dumbledore, suspect anything is wrong. The man drinks suspicious amounts of potion, behaves erratically, and steers Harry toward danger, yet the staff accepts it all as the quirks of a veteran aura. Once again, it is Harry, not the adults, who survives and uncovers the truth. The professors are reduced to reacting in shock when the deception is revealed, proving powerless to prevent catastrophe before it unfolds. This helplessness extends to matters of discipline and order. In The Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy plots to assassinate Dumbledore. He sneaks Death Eaters into the castle using the Vanishing Cabinet, right under the noses of teachers who claim to monitor everything. The invasion culminates in the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, where the staff are unprepared, scattered, and ineffective. Once again, it is students, Harry and his allies, who confront the danger head-on. The professors, supposedly the guardians of Hogwarts, seem curiously absent or ineffective at the decisive moment. Nor is this merely a matter of oversight. The adults sometimes act with open passivity. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Dolores Umbridge takes over the school, the teachers offer little resistance. They grumble, they disapprove, but they do not act. It is Fred and George Weasley, not McGonagall or Flitwick, who stage open rebellion. Dumbledore himself vanishes, leaving students to face tyranny on their own. The striking image is that of adults silenced, unwilling to challenge authority, while the young must shoulder the burden of resistance. The pattern is clear. When Hogwarts is threatened, the professors retreat and the children rise. The quote, "Students, return to your dormitories," becomes emblematic of this strange trend. Instead of confronting the threat, professors send children away and close the doors. It creates an atmosphere where the true protectors of Hogwarts are not the staff, but Harry and his friends. And this makes for thrilling storytelling, but it also undermines the credibility of Hogwarts as a safe place of learning. The children are consistently thrust into roles of saviors, while the adults are relegated to sidelines. One might argue that Dumbledore himself chooses to withhold action, preferring to test Harry, to allow him to grow through danger. Indeed, Dumbledore confesses in The Half-Blood Prince that he withheld information to prepare Harry for his ultimate confrontation with Voldemort. Yet, this explanation feels insufficient when examined against the repeated helplessness of the rest of the staff. Even if Dumbledore manipulates events from behind the scenes, why must Snape, McGonagall, and others appear blind or ineffective? Their silence cannot all be attributed to Dumbledore's plans. What makes this strangeness stand out is the sheer talent of the professors. Flitwick taught charms to generations and mastered dueling. McGonagall could transform objects with a flick of her wand. Snape brewed complex potions with precision. Hagrid, despite his flaws, had immense magical knowledge of creatures. These individuals should have been formidable defenders, and yet when crises arise, they fail to act decisively. They are reduced to observers or secondary players in stories dominated by students. It is a contradiction between the narrative description of their power and their portrayal in action. The strangest aspect of all is that Harry himself often succeeds not through superior magical skill, but through courage, loyalty, and intuition. He is not stronger than his professors, he is simply braver. He survives the basilisk by wielding the sword of Gryffindor, a weapon of destiny rather than training. He exposes Pettigrew by chance and persistence, rather than by advanced detection spells. He faces Voldemort because he is willing to sacrifice himself. The adults could never fill this role because they lack the narrative quality of innocence and moral clarity. Still, their repeated helplessness raises uncomfortable questions about Hogwarts' competence. The paradox is therefore clear. Hogwarts is hailed as the pinnacle of magical education, yet time after time its staff prove unable to recognize or combat the threats that lurk in its very halls. Students are told to return to their dormitories, teachers wring their hands, and Dumbledore remains enigmatic. Meanwhile, children fight monsters, unmask traitors, and confront evil head-on. This strangeness is more than a narrative convenience. It reshapes our understanding of the wizarding world. Hogwarts, a place of supposed safety, is revealed to be the stage where children save themselves because the adults cannot. And perhaps this is the most unsettling idea of all. In the magical world of Harry Potter, wisdom and power do not guarantee action. Authority figures, no matter how talented, are depicted as weak when faced with crisis. It is left to children to do what their teachers cannot. The strangeness of powerless professors lingers as a reminder that in Hogwarts true guardianship is absent and salvation depends on those least expected to carry it, the students themselves. Number 18. Magic that disappears. In the world of Harry Potter, magic is introduced as a force without boundaries, a phenomenon so vast that even wizards themselves seem unable to fully comprehend its scope. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione Granger flicks her wand and whispers, "Alohomora," and the lock clicks open with a neat precision. The scene is simple, yet it reveals something profound. The ability of an 11-year-old student to undo human-made barriers with a spell no more complex than a breath. Readers at this moment are encouraged to believe that magic is limitless, that a wizard or witch can bend the mundane world with effortless ease. But as the story expands across 7 volumes, this perception begins to unravel. Doors suddenly resist, enchantments become impervious, and barriers once thought fragile turn into insurmountable obstacles. Magic, which was promised as omnipotent, shifts its shape according to the narrative's demands. The inconsistencies grow more visible when one looks at the many locked doors scattered throughout the saga. In the first book, Harry and his friends use Alohomora to enter the forbidden corridor guarded by the 3-headed dog, Fluffy. The spell works instantly as though locks themselves are trivial before the will of a wizard. Yet in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Neville and Luna break into the Department of Mysteries, there are doors that refuse to open no matter what incantation they hurl at them. The same. Hermione, who once mastered unlocking charms, cannot make the handle budge. Rowling even describes the failure. None of the doors would open. How can it be that the girl who unlocked magical defenses at age 11 is suddenly powerless at 15? The lock in this case is no longer an object to be conquered, but a wall imposed by the narrative itself. Consider the Chamber of Secrets. The entrance is hidden behind an ordinary sink in the girls' bathroom, accessible only by speaking Parseltongue. When Harry hisses the words, the sink moves aside and the chamber opens. This is presented as a marvel of magical engineering, a secret known only to those who share the tongue of serpents. But the question arises, why would Slytherin's descendants rely on such a crude mechanism? Could not any skilled wizard, like Albus Dumbledore or even Severus Snape, break through with a spell of sufficient force? The reality is that the door opens because Harry must open it. The spell Alohomora, so effective elsewhere, suddenly cannot exist here. The rule is not magical logic, but the necessity of plot. Even more striking is the inconsistency of magical duels. At times, they resemble battles of immense power, where streams of light and energy clash in the air, like when Dumbledore faces Voldemort in the Ministry of Magic. But in other moments, magic shrinks into trivial gestures. During the Triwizard Tournament, Harry faces obstacles that can be solved only with ingenuity rather than raw magical force. The hedge maze resists spells. The dragons are subdued by tactics, not overwhelming charms. If wizards hold access to near unlimited destructive potential, why does the contest reduce them to improvisers struggling against barriers that ought to crumble before their wands? Rowling seems to bend the rules, turning magic into an inconsistent instrument, grand when spectacle is needed, and fragile when tension must be preserved. The inconsistency becomes even more troubling when examined in the context of Voldemort himself. He is described as the most dangerous dark wizard of all time, yet his defeat rests not in the failure of Harry to match his spells, but in Voldemort's own errors. The killing curse, Avada Kedavra, is portrayed as the ultimate expression of magical power, a spell against which there is no defense. But time and again Rowling undermines this absolute. Harry survives it not once but multiple times. In the Goblet of Fire, during the graveyard duel, the priori incantatem effect stalls Voldemort's curse long enough for Harry to escape. In the Deathly Hallows, the same curse rebounds, ending Voldemort's life. If the most lethal magic in existence can be neutralized by chance, by the core connection between two wands, or by the protective power of love, then is it truly the unstoppable force it claims to be? The reader begins to sense that magic is as fragile as paper when weighed against the machinery of narrative. A smaller but equally telling example lies in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. When Dumbledore and Harry enter the cave to retrieve the locket Horcrux, the headmaster demonstrates magic of staggering strength. He parts the sea of black rock to reveal the entrance, conjures fire to hold back the Inferi, and manipulates the very elements with his wand. Yet not long after, when he is surrounded by Death Eaters atop the Astronomy Tower, his wand is useless. Draco Malfoy disarms him, and Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, is powerless to resist. The dissonance is impossible to ignore. One moment magic makes him nearly godlike, the next he becomes fragile, his spells lost to silence. The explanation is not found in the logic of magic, but in the narrative's demand for tragedy. The Hogwarts castle itself is another contradiction. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the Marauder's map can show every secret passage, every room, and every person within the castle. Fred and George Weasley use it casually, slipping through corridors unnoticed. But in the Deathly Hallows, the same castle transforms into an impregnable fortress. Snape cannot be tracked with ease, and Voldemort's forces are delayed by enchantments whose complexity seems far beyond what was described before. If a group of mischievous schoolboys could once map the entire building, why is it suddenly impossible for Voldemort, a master of dark arts, to uncover its secrets? Once more, the rules adapt not to magical consistency but to dramatic necessity. This strangeness extends to the use of simple spells. Expelliarmus becomes Harry's signature move, a disarming charm that in theory should only knock a wand from an opponent's hand. Yet in multiple duels it behaves as a weapon of overwhelming force, stunning or incapacitating foes. In the Deathly Hallows it is even the final spell that defeats Voldemort. How does a school-level incantation rise to become the equal of Avada Kedavra? It is not that Harry's wand changes the mechanics of magic, but that Rowling decides the spell must carry symbolic weight. Magic bends to morality rather than mechanics, transforming the laws of its world into malleable clay. The inconsistency is not confined to combat. Consider everyday conveniences. Wizards ride broomsticks, use owls for letters, and brew potions for ailments. Yet they also rely on candles, handwritten notes, and carriages drawn by thestrals. If magic can conjure food, clean a room, and transport people across great distances, why do the Wizarding World's inhabitants continue to live with the inconveniences of medieval existence? Molly Weasley scrubs pots, Arthur tinkers with plugs, and the Ministry files endless parchment reports. The contradiction is jarring. Magic is capable of extraordinary feats, yet fails to address the ordinary struggles of daily life. When the plot requires mystery, magic becomes opaque. The prophecy in the Department of Mysteries is stored in a fragile glass orb, which can be shattered like any mundane object. A prophecy that holds the fate of the Wizarding World rests in the same vulnerability as a child's toy. And yet, when the orb breaks, the knowledge vanishes into the air, irretrievable. Why should a power so vast be contained in such a fragile vessel? Because the story demands impermanence, demands that truth must be grasped in fleeting moments. Magic, once more, is moulded by narrative urgency. Even time-turners, introduced in The Prisoner of Azkaban, reveal the instability of magic's rules. Hermione uses the device to attend multiple classes, and later Harry and she use it to save Sirius Black. The magic here is world-altering, allowing time itself to be bent and reshaped. But by the fifth book, Rowling abruptly eliminates time-turners, declaring them all destroyed in the battle at the Ministry. Such a convenient disappearance exposes the flaw. The existence of time manipulation is too powerful for the story to contain. It is erased not by logical consequence, but by authorial necessity. The heart of the issue lies in Rowling's shifting portrayal of what magic can and cannot do. At times it is a weapon, at times a puzzle, and at times a fragile illusion. When Hagrid taps a pink umbrella against a door in Philosopher's Stone and transforms Dudley's tail, magic feels limitless and playful. But when Lupin struggles against Dementors in Prisoner of Azkaban, nearly fainting from exhaustion, magic feels fragile and finite. The contrast is too stark to ignore. The greatest paradox comes in the climax of the series. Voldemort, who has devoted his life to mastering dark arts, dies not because Harry's magic overwhelms his own, but because the Elder Wand refuses allegiance. The ultimate weapon in magical lore betrays its master not by spell but by technicality. Rowling reduces the grand conflict between good and evil to a question of wand ownership. Magic, which once appeared infinite, collapses into a legal clause of wand law. The fate of the wizarding world hangs on semantics, not sorcery. These contradictions do not diminish the story's emotional power, but they do reveal a pattern. Magic in Harry Potter is not a coherent system but a narrative device, expanding when wonder is required, contracting when suspense must be preserved. Alohomora can unlock a door one day and fail utterly the next. Avada Kedavra can kill without mercy, yet rebound when the plot demands justice. The laws of magic are not carved into stone, they are written in sand, shifting with every tide of story. For the reader, the realization is unsettling. The strength of wizards is not in their spells, but in the author's hand, shaping power into weakness and weakness into triumph whenever the tale requires it. Number 19. Hogwarts and Safety. Hogwarts, the castle that stands as a beacon of magic and mystery, carries with it a paradox so unsettling that one cannot help but pause and reflect. It is presented as the safest place for young witches and wizards, yet year after year, Harry Potter and his classmates encounter dangers that far surpass anything a normal child should face. From the very first year, danger becomes not an exception, but a tradition. The moment Professor Quirrell bursts into the Great Hall shouting, "Troll in the dungeon! Thought you ought to know," the illusion of safety shatters. That night, 11-year-old children are trapped in a castle with a raging mountain troll, and only by sheer luck and courage do Harry, Ron, and Hermione survive. But what is more disturbing is not the troll itself, but the casual way in which the staff and the magical authorities treat the event. The Ministry of Magic never intervenes, no parents demand answers, and the year continues as though nothing significant happened. The strangeness grows with every subsequent year. In Harry's second year, the Chamber of Secrets is opened, and a basilisk, one of the most lethal creatures in the magical world, roams the school, petrifying students. Argus Filch's cat, Colin Creevey, Justin Finch-Fletchley, and even Hermione herself fall victim to the creature. At this point, the school is not merely unsafe, it is actively dangerous. A monstrous serpent large enough to kill an adult wizard slithers through the pipes, and yet Dumbledore and the staff allow classes to continue. The castle becomes a hunting ground, with Harry eventually forced into mortal combat with the basilisk. He emerges victorious, but one must question the sanity of a world in which a 12-year-old boy is expected to face such a threat. The lack of parental outrage seems almost surreal. Would any mother or father allow their child to remain in a school where death lurks behind every corner? The third year brings another layer of absurdity to this illusion of safety. The Ministry sends Dementors, soul-sucking beings, to guard the school. Their very presence endangers the mental health of students, as we see when Harry collapses multiple times at their approach. At the same time, an alleged murderer, Sirius Black, is believed to be on the loose and infiltrates the castle on more than one occasion. Portraits scream, corridors are sealed, and students are terrified. Yet the year continues without a serious reconsideration of the dangers. What is perhaps most striking is that the ministry itself is complicit here, placing creatures known to cause despair into a school filled with children. Even Professor Lupin, who genuinely cares for his students, transforms into a werewolf at the end of the year and nearly attacks Harry and Hermione. Once again, catastrophe is narrowly avoided, but the broader question remains, why is this considered acceptable? In the fourth year, the situation escalates beyond anything imaginable for a boarding school. The Triwizard Tournament is reinstated, a contest known historically for its fatalities. The Triwizard Tournament was discontinued, Dumbledore reminds the students, due to the high death toll. And yet, this tradition is revived, and 14-year-old Harry is forced into participation against his will. He faces dragons, mermaids, and a maze filled with lethal enchantments. Parents sit in the stands, cheering as their children face near-death experiences, as though this is entertainment rather than a school function. The tournament culminates in Harry's transportation to a graveyard where Voldemort is reborn. Cedric Diggory dies, and Harry barely survives. When he returns with Cedric's body, the Ministry and the Hogwarts leadership treat the incident as a political inconvenience, rather than a catastrophe. At what point does the concept of child protection vanish entirely from this magical world? The fifth year shifts the danger inward, showing how the institution itself becomes a weapon against the students. Dolores Umbridge, appointed by the Ministry, transforms the school into an authoritarian nightmare. Physical torture is disguised as detention, as Harry is forced to carve the words "I must not tell lies" into his own flesh. No adult intervenes to stop this cruelty. The Weasley twins stage a rebellion, and Dumbledore's army is forced to train in secret simply to feel empowered against injustice. Ironically, it is in this year that we see most clearly how little the Ministry of Magic cares for the well-being of children, since Umbridge's rule represents official sanction of abuse. The battle at the Department of Mysteries, where Harry, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Neville, and Luna nearly die, is the culmination of this neglect. Teenagers are thrust into war because adults have failed to protect them. By the sixth year, even the boundaries of the school no longer seem capable of keeping the darkness out. Death Eaters infiltrate Hogwarts itself, leading to the catastrophic battle that ends with Dumbledore's death. The very leader who was supposed to embody protection is struck down, leaving the students exposed. Before that, Harry and Draco Malfoy duel in a bathroom with the deadly Sectum Sempra curse, proving that even peer conflict within these walls can spiral into mortal danger. Slughorn throws parties and Quidditch matches continue as if normal life is possible. But in reality, Hogwarts has become a battlefield in preparation for a larger war. The school no longer pretends to be safe. It is a fortress, crumbling under the weight of external and internal threats alike. In the seventh book, Hogwarts becomes a war zone in the most literal sense. The Battle of Hogwarts transforms classrooms and corridors into killing grounds. Students, some underage, fight alongside adults in combat against Voldemort's army. Fred Weasley dies, Colin Creevey dies, and countless others fall in a conflict that erases any line between school and battlefield. The irony is complete. The institution that was supposed to educate and nurture becomes the final stage of open war. The youngest fighters, who should have been kept far from violence, are instead placed at the very center of it. It is no longer about subtle danger, but direct confrontation with death. And yet, even before this climax, the cumulative history of Hogwarts shows a disturbing trend. Danger was never the exception, it was always the rule. Why then do parents continue to send their children to Hogwarts? Why does the Ministry never step in to shut the school down? These questions haunt the narrative because they expose the fragility of the illusion Rowling builds. The simplest answer may be cultural. In the wizarding world, danger is normalized. and courage is valued above caution. When Molly Weasley sends her children back year after year, one wonders whether parental love in this society comes second to tradition. The parents cheer at Quidditch matches, even after knowing that bludgers can break bones, that broomsticks can be cursed, and that Dementors can swoop down mid-game. Perhaps the wizarding community has become so accustomed to living alongside danger that they no longer recognize the severity of exposing children to it. Even the teachers seem complicit in this pattern. Severus Snape terrifies students with verbal cruelty, yet is trusted with their education. Hagrid introduces them to blast-ended Scroots, dangerous creatures capable of injuring them under the pretense of magical learning. Professor Moody, though later revealed as Barty Crouch Jr., throws unforgivable curses in front of students, normalizing exposure to the darkest aspects of magic. In each case, the line between education and endangerment is blurred. The professors are not villains, but their negligence contributes to a culture where student safety is never prioritized. The castle becomes a proving ground rather than a sanctuary. The most unsettling aspect is the silence that follows each catastrophe. After the troll, no parents storm the castle. After the basilisk, no child is withdrawn. After Cedric Diggory's death, the Triwizard Tournament is not universally condemned. Silence becomes the loudest response, as though the wizarding community has collectively agreed that survival itself is part of education. The quote, "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends," captures Dumbledore's philosophy, but perhaps it also hints at a darker truth. Bravery in this world is expected even of children. Safety is sacrificed. At the altar of courage, one might argue that Hogwarts mirrors the world beyond its walls. The Wizarding Society itself is corrupt, with the Ministry more concerned with reputation than truth, as seen when Cornelius Fudge refuses to acknowledge Voldemort's return. If corruption and denial define the adult world, then it is unsurprising that schools reflect the same. Hogwarts becomes a microcosm of the wizarding world's flaws. Children are taught not just spells, but the lesson that survival requires facing danger head-on, regardless of age. It is a brutal education, masked by the romance of magical learning. The oddity of Hogwarts lies not only in its repeated exposure of students to peril, but in the normalization of such events. When the reader reflects on this, the magical castle becomes less a safe haven and more a stage for continual crises. Each book escalates the risk until the line between schooling and warfare is completely erased. Perhaps Rowling intended this progression to parallel the loss of innocence, showing how childhood gives way to the reality of conflict. But, on a deeper level, it leaves us with a chilling realization. In the wizarding world, child safety is an illusion, and danger is woven into the very foundation of education. Number 20, the prophecy puzzle. The prophecy that hangs over Harry Potter's life is one of the most puzzling and haunting elements of J.K. Rowling's story. When Sybil Trelawney, in a rare moment of true foresight, whispered the fateful words to Albus Dumbledore in a shabby room above the Hog's Head Inn, she set in motion the tragedy of an entire generation. Yet the deeper one looks at those words, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The stranger the entire plot becomes. In a magical world where prophecies are known to be vague, where prediction is often twisted by interpretation, why did everyone, from Lord Voldemort to Dumbledore himself, treat this prophecy as a literal and unquestionable script of destiny? The first strange turn lies in Voldemort's reaction. He heard only half the prophecy delivered to him by Severus Snape, yet he was so certain of its truth that he staked his entire future upon it. The idea that a baby, still in its crib, could destroy the most feared dark wizard of the age was absurd. Yet Voldemort acted as though the words had been carved in stone. Instead of dismissing the prophecy as a riddle, he made it his mission to prevent it by ensuring that the child, Harry Potter, would die before he grew old enough to fulfill it. In doing so, Voldemort essentially created the very conditions that made the prophecy possible. His decision is one of the most ironic acts in the series because it illustrates how his own interpretation of fate bound him tighter to it. One cannot overlook Dumbledore's part in the strangeness. As the only wizard alive who had heard the prophecy in full, he held the responsibility of interpreting it for the Order of the Phoenix and for Harry himself. Dumbledore, a man famed for his wisdom and constant questioning of truth, did not challenge the idea that one must kill the other. He treated the words as law. When he finally explained the prophecy to Harry in the headmaster's office at the end of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he admitted that Harry had been burdened with knowledge since childhood, and he spoke as if destiny had been sealed. Yet even Dumbledore admitted earlier in the same book that the truth is a beautiful and terrible thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution. Why then did he not apply the same caution to the prophecy? Why did he not argue for a metaphorical meaning, perhaps seeing the line as symbolic of mutual destruction of ideals rather than literal death? The phrasing itself invites doubt. The words "neither can live while the other survives" are poetic, almost riddling, and do not automatically require a fatal interpretation. One could imagine a world where Harry and Voldemort are locked in endless opposition, unable to thrive in peace while the other exists. Their living might not mean physical existence, but rather the flourishing of their power. In this sense, the prophecy could have been understood as describing a permanent struggle, not an inevitable murder. Yet every major character, whether in the Ministry of Magic or at Hogwarts, behaved as though it carried only one meaning. That rigidity of interpretation is suspicious in a world that otherwise teems with magical ambiguity. Trelawney herself is the embodiment of that ambiguity. For most of the series, her predictions are comical, exaggerated, and rarely true. She constantly declares that students will die, warns Harry of the grim, and fills her classroom with theatrical dread. Even Hermione dismisses divination as woolly. The idea that her words could suddenly dictate the future of the wizarding world seems inconsistent. Rowling shows us repeatedly that prophecies are not absolute, that the way people act in response to them shapes the outcome. Dumbledore even tells Harry directly, "It was, I think, the power of your choices." If that is the case, why does the prophecy seem to operate differently from every other prediction in the books? The tragedy of James and Lily Potter's deaths illustrates how blind faith in the prophecy shaped events. Voldemort believed he had to kill Harry, and in trying to do so he killed Harry's parents. He marked the child as his equal by accident, leaving the lightning-shaped scar that became the symbol of their bond. This was not dictated by the prophecy itself, but by Voldemort's interpretation of it. In other words, without Voldemort's attack, the prophecy might never have come true at all. This raises the disturbing question: was the prophecy ever real, or was it merely a self-fulfilling cycle of fear and belief? Consider the Department of Mysteries, where hundreds of glass spheres hold prophecies that only their subjects can retrieve. The scene in Order of the Phoenix shows Harry holding the orb that contains his prophecy as Death Eaters scramble to seize it for their master. The shelves stretch endlessly, filled with countless predictions, many of which were never fulfilled. The Ministry stores them, but they are not certainties. They are fragments of possibility. Why then did Voldemort invest so much power in this one prophecy when he himself had mocked divination at Hogwarts and dismissed Trelawney's talent? His obsession seems inconsistent with his character unless fear clouded his reason. Harry himself accepts the prophecy with a resignation that seems both brave and troubling. When Dumbledore finally reveals it, Harry's response is not to question its meaning, but to accept that he must kill Voldemort or die in the attempt. He does not pause to wonder if there could be another path. This acceptance reflects Harry's selfless nature, but it also demonstrates how the prophecy trapped him in a narrative of violence. His choices, which Dumbledore praised as paramount, were restricted by a belief in inevitability. Was Harry truly free, or was he guided into one single outcome by the conviction of those around him? Another strange detail lies in Neville Longbottom. The prophecy stated that the child born as the 7th month dies would be marked as the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Neville was born just a day before Harry, and Voldemort could just as easily have chosen him. This coincidence reveals how arbitrary fate might have been. It was Voldemort's choice that made Harry the chosen one. If he had targeted Neville instead, history would have followed a completely different path. The randomness of that decision undermines the aura of inevitability around the prophecy, suggesting that destiny was less about magic and more about human interpretation. Even within the prophecy, the phrase, "and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal," demonstrates how Voldemort's own actions created the conditions for its truth. Without attempting to kill Harry, without the backfiring of the killing curse, there would be no scar, no connection between them, no shared mind. Voldemort essentially authored half the prophecy himself by the way he acted upon it. This paradox highlights the fragility of fate. It requires human hands to give it shape, even as humans believe they are powerless to stop it. Dumbledore's secrecy about the prophecy adds another layer of strangeness. He kept it hidden from Harry for 15 years, claiming that Harry was too young to bear such a burden. When he finally confessed, it was only after Sirius Black's death, when Harry was already consumed by grief. By then, the revelation seemed almost cruel, as though Dumbledore had intentionally delayed the inevitable moment of acceptance. If the prophecy was not absolute truth, why did Dumbledore allow Harry to suffer under its weight? His silence gave the prophecy an aura of mystery that magnified its importance in Harry's mind. In examining the words carefully, one might argue that they were never intended to be literal at all. The prophecy could be read as a poetic description of the eternal clash between light and darkness, between love and hate. "Neither can live while the other survives" might not refer to individuals, but to the abstract forces they embody. Harry represents compassion, sacrifice, and courage, while Voldemort represents cruelty, selfishness, and fear. Their struggle could continue as long as both ideals exist in the world. Interpreting it this way, the prophecy is less about death and more about the endless battle between good and evil. Yet Rowling's narrative chose the darker reading. Harry and Voldemort did face each other in a final duel, and one did indeed die at the hand of the other. The prophecy was fulfilled in the most literal sense possible, but the question remains, was this outcome truly dictated by destiny, or did the characters shape it by their unshakable belief in it? Every step along the way, from Voldemort's first attack to Harry's final sacrifice in the Forbidden Forest, was influenced by their faith that the prophecy could not be defied. Perhaps the greatest irony of all is that the prophecy might have been meaningless without Voldemort's obsession with it. By trying to escape fate, he ensured its fulfillment. He turned a vague prediction into a roadmap of his own destruction. Dumbledore, though wiser, also submitted to its power, guiding Harry down the same road. In the end, the prophecy did not reveal destiny, it revealed character. Voldemort's fear, Dumbledore's secrecy, and Harry's acceptance shaped the events far more than Trelawney's words ever could. The mystery of the prophecy remains one of the most compelling riddles of the Harry Potter saga. It challenges the reader to question whether fate exists or whether belief in fate creates it. It forces us to see how words once spoken can gain power, not from magic itself, but from the choices of those who hear them. And it leaves us with the unsettling thought that perhaps the strangest part of the prophecy is not what it said, but how everyone acted as though it could mean nothing else. Number 21. Why don't Muggles notice anything? Wizards and witches live in a world that breathes magic, yet their closest neighbours, the Muggles, walk through life oblivious to the spells and enchantments surrounding them. The strangeness of this arrangement grows more puzzling the deeper one looks. J.K. Rowling gives us scattered explanations, but when pieced together, they raise more questions than they resolve. The passage in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is striking. Muggles see only ruined castles and a sign that says danger. It sounds neat and simple, but the magnitude of what is implied stretches beyond reason. Magical Britain is not a handful of eccentric wizards hiding in cottages. It is a parallel society with schools, ministries, stadiums, and entire industries. Could such an immense structure truly remain invisible in the age of science, record-keeping, and relentless human curiosity? The most glaring example of this paradox is the Quidditch World Cup. The event Harry attends in 1994 is massive, hosting thousands of witches and wizards from across the globe. Entire campsites are filled with families, colourful tents cover the countryside. Wizards and witches gather from as far away as Bulgaria and Ireland. The Muggle campsite manager, Mr. Roberts, quickly becomes overwhelmed by the strangeness around him, requiring constant memory modifications. Arthur Weasley remarks with concern, "He'll need a memory charm 10 times a day to keep him happy." But can the Ministry realistically wipe the memories of every Muggle who happens to glance at the sky, who hears the roaring crowd, or who notices thousands of strangers in outlandish clothing? The Ministry officials act as though obliviators can patch up every loose thread, yet the spectacle of an international sports event is not something that vanishes without trace. The scale of magical transportation alone should make secrecy nearly impossible. Wizards travel daily through the Floo network, vanishing into fireplaces, stepping out of hearths across town, sometimes covered in soot. Apparition, or disapparating with a loud crack, is frequently heard by Muggles. Rowling herself notes that Muggles often explain away these sounds as car backfires or popping balloons, but when an entire society routinely vanishes and reappears, how can thousands of cracks and bangs go unnoticed? Year after year. The magical community seems to rely on the idea that Muggles are unimaginative, unwilling to question the strange. And yet history shows us the opposite. Humans have always chased mysteries, from lights in the sky to creatures in the sea. If Muggles can build myths about Loch Ness or Roswell, why are there not endless tales of people disappearing in a flash or reappearing in alleyways? The Obliviator Squad becomes the silent army maintaining the veil. Gilderoy Lockhart, with all his flaws, reminds us that memory charms can be unreliable. His own disastrous use of Obliviate destroyed his identity, yet we are told that the Ministry applies similar spells to countless Muggles who accidentally encounter magic. Think of Dudley Dursley's own bewilderment when Hagrid gave him a pig's tail, or when Aunt Marge inflated like a balloon. Petunia and Vernon did not have their memories erased. They lived with the knowledge that magic was real, though they tried to suppress it. If even the Dursleys could not deny what they had seen, how could millions of other Muggles truly forget? The probability of misfires, resistance, or hidden memories must be significant. And still, the wizarding world insists on the illusion of perfect secrecy. Consider, too, the very geography of Britain, the leaky cauldron, the shabby little pub that serves as gateway to Diagon Alley, stands on Charing Cross Road in London. If a Muggle looks at it, they see a small, grubby-looking pub, Rowling writes. The enchantment prevents them from noticing, and they glide past. But what of the endless traffic cameras, the surveillance culture of modern London? Wizards in bowler hats vanish into a brick wall in broad daylight, and somehow no grainy video reaches the news. It strains the imagination. Even if the statute of secrecy works on human perception, does it extend to machines? Do the Muggles' photographs blur out? Does their film reel erase itself? Rowling hints that magic interferes with technology, but the explanation remains elusive and the larger question lingers. How long could wizards realistically hide from the world once it is saturated with cameras and satellites? The problem deepens when we think of magical disasters. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry accidentally inflates Aunt Marge, who floats away like a grotesque balloon. Ministry officials later smooth things over, but what if she had drifted across a city's skyline? What if she had burst into the public eye before being deflated? Magical creatures create similar dilemmas. The rampaging dragon at the Triwizard Tournament, though hidden behind spells, breathes fire that echoes for miles. In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, set decades earlier, Newt Scamander struggles to conceal dangerous creatures in New York, nearly exposing wizard kind. These examples show the fragility of the masquerade. The wizarding world teeters constantly on the brink of exposure, yet muggles remain astonishingly blind. Part of the answer lies in magical psychology. Dumbledore tells Harry in Half-Blood Prince, "The trouble is, the other side can disguise themselves as well. Muggles do not notice oddities." Wizards appear to believe that muggles actively ignore the strange. When faced with the extraordinary, they rationalize it into the ordinary. A broomstick streaking across the night sky becomes a trick of the light. A giant on the street becomes a tall man in a coat. Yet this assumption underestimates the human hunger for explanation. Muggles built entire sciences to unravel mysteries. Why would they not chase the sound of disapparition or the unexplained fires caused by spells? The narrative invites us to believe in muggle blindness, but it feels like a convenient patch rather than a true answer. Think about Rita Skeeter, the journalist who thrived on sensationalism. She sought out scandal within the wizarding world with her enchanted quill. But what if a muggle journalist of similar temperament stumbled across even a fragment of the truth? A single photograph of a Quidditch match in the clouds, a single interview with a bewildered witness of apparition, and the secrecy would be shredded. Yet no such exposure ever reaches the muggle press. Either the Ministry has absolute control over muggle media, erasing and silencing as needed, or we must accept the implausible notion that no muggle reporter has ever stumbled onto the trail. The lack of leaks is perhaps the strangest element of all. The most chilling possibility is that the Ministry does not hesitate to rewrite memories on a vast scale. Mr. Roberts at the Quidditch campsite is only one example. The sheer casualness with which Arthur Weasley discusses his constant obliviations is unsettling. How many times has the Ministry reached into muggle minds to smooth over the cracks? If they are willing to alter individuals repeatedly, might they not also alter entire groups, entire towns, perhaps even nations? The thought is Orwellian. A secret government silently controlling human perception, molding reality so that magic never leaks through. If so, the wizarding world is built not on innocence, but on a constant violation of human autonomy. We must also not forget that wizards are not perfect in their secrecy. Harry himself performs accidental magic repeatedly in muggle settings. He vanishes the glass in a zoo, sending a snake slithering free. He finds himself on the roof of a school. Dudley's gang sees these events, yet they remain unrecorded beyond whispers. How many other magical children across Britain cause such accidents daily? The Ministry tracks underage magic through the trace, but intervention cannot always be instant. The muggle world must be peppered with unexplained stories, urban legends of children who vanish and reappear. These tales should accumulate into a body of folklore impossible to ignore. Yet in Rowling's universe, the muggle world is eerily silent. Take the example of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies. It is hidden inside an old London department store, guarded by illusions. But a building of such size, with patients entering and leaving, healers working in shifts, and deliveries of potions and supplies, would inevitably attract attention. How can a bustling hospital function in the middle of London without arousing the notice of city planners, utility companies, or passing pedestrians? The concealment spells appear absolute, but this raises a larger philosophical question. Is the wizarding world truly coexisting with muggles, or is it imposing itself invisibly like a ghost, erasing footprints as soon as they are made? Even the concept of wizarding wars raises complications. When Voldemort terrorized Britain in the 1970s and later in the 1990s, battles, explosions, and deaths occurred. Muggles were killed, bridges collapsed, catastrophes shook the land. Fudge himself explains in Half-Blood Prince that the Prime Minister must be informed of wizarding dangers, but if the Prime Minister knows, then others in government must suspect. How many cover-ups does it take before the veil begins to tear? And if the Prime Minister is bound to silence, does the wizarding world hold political power over Muggle leaders as well? This subtle domination suggests a much darker relationship between the two societies than Rowling openly admits. Perhaps the Statute of Secrecy enacted in 1692 is more powerful than it seems, not just a law, but an enchantment woven into reality itself. Maybe the wizarding world does not merely hide, it actively reshapes perception on a subconscious level, ensuring that Muggles can never fully connect the dots. In this reading, the entire human race is under a spell, not just individuals. Every oddity is dismissed, every glimpse forgotten, every suspicion dissolved into rationalization. It is a haunting thought because it would mean the wizarding community has bound Muggles to blindness for centuries without their knowledge or consent. Still, even this theory struggles against the reality of modernity. Cameras, satellites, global communications, none of these existed in 1692. The statute might bend minds, but can it bend machines? Rowling leaves the question open. Harry's world is steeped in enchantment, yet it is never forced to reconcile with the relentless curiosity and technology of the Muggle world. The mystery persists. How do wizards and witches continue to thrive in plain sight, while Muggles walk past them every day, unaware that entire universes shimmer just beyond the veil of their perception? Number 22. Letters from Hogwarts. The image of a small boy surrounded by flying letters is one of the most iconic in the entire Harry Potter saga. Rowling describes it with a sense of wonder, but also with a dose of absurdity. The letters began to pour in, hundreds of them. They came whizzing down the chimney, burst from windows and scattered across the floor. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The entire sequence plays out like a feverish nightmare for Vernon Dursley, but a miracle for Harry. Yet beneath the excitement, the scene raises a strange question. If magical letters can find their recipient no matter where he hides, why is this system never used elsewhere in the wizarding world? Why did Sirius Black, for instance, remain untraceable for over a decade, while Hogwarts mail could locate Harry on a shack balanced above the sea? The plot presents us with a mystery that seems too glaring to ignore. Hogwarts letters are not just parchment and ink. They embody a mechanism of magical tracking so precise that no Muggle surveillance system could dream of replicating it. In the very first book, we see how the letters adapt instantly to Harry's changing environment, first addressed to the cupboard under the stairs, then to the smallest bedroom, and finally, astonishingly, to the hut on the rock, the sea. Each envelope identifies not only Harry's location, but the very details of his living space. This implies that the magic behind these letters does not rely on ordinary delivery methods, but on some form of absolute recognition of the recipient's essence. Harry cannot escape the post because the post is bound not to geography, but to him. This realization makes the Ministry's behavior in later books feel oddly inconsistent. When Sirius Black escapes from Azkaban in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Cornelius Fudge deploys Dementors to patrol the castle and even boards the Hogwarts Express in search of the fugitive. For months, the wizarding government is on edge, terrified of a man who supposedly intends to kill Harry. Yet not once does anyone suggest using the same magical tracking system that Hogwarts letters employ. It is not even raised as a possibility. The Ministry invests resources into magical patrols, enchanted posters, and media propaganda, but ignores what appears to be the simplest and most reliable tool available in their world. The case becomes even stranger when we recall that owls can find their recipients no matter where they are. In The Goblet of Fire, Hedwig delivers letters all the way to Sirius, who is hiding abroad. She manages to locate him when he is living off the grid, sending his replies from vague destinations in tropical regions. If one ordinary owl, guided by the magic of wizard correspondence, can accomplish this feat, it is baffling that the Ministry cannot exploit the same system. Instead, auras scour Britain blindly as though they are powerless. It makes the Hogwarts letters appear not only wondrous but also disturbingly underused, as if the wizarding world has willfully ignored one of its own. most powerful technologies. When Harry is still at Privet Drive, the letter's persistence is treated as a joke. Vernon Dursley frantically nails the mail slot shut, boards up windows, and drives the family to remote motels. None of this matters. The letters still rain down. One almost feels sorry for Vernon when the fireplace spits out a torrent of envelopes like a volcanic eruption. And yet imagine if such a system were applied to law enforcement. Imagine if the ministry could write a single letter to Peter Pettigrew, animagus, wherever he hides. Would it not instantly reveal his location? Would it not have saved lives, prevented betrayals, and perhaps even ended the war with Voldemort earlier? The oddity is glaring. What is presented as comical persistence in one scene becomes, when examined logically, a frighteningly efficient tracking device. Perhaps one explanation is that this magic is controlled exclusively by Hogwarts, bound to the ritual of inviting students at age 11. Dumbledore himself seems to preside over the system, as suggested when McGonagall discusses Harry's letter during the opening chapter. If true, this would make Hogwarts an institution with not just educational power, but surveillance authority. The headmaster could, in theory, locate any child of magical ability anywhere in Britain. This raises unsettling implications about how much information the school has at its disposal and why such knowledge is not shared in times of crisis. If letters can follow Harry into a storm-battered hut, then Hogwarts could theoretically find any witch or wizard with equal precision. The peculiar case of Sirius Black further emphasizes the paradox. For 12 years he hides in his animagus form, living as a stray dog in London's alleys. The ministry cannot track him. The prophet spreads fear that he has eluded capture through cunning and dark magic. But what if one had merely written a letter to him? The owl, loyal and unerring, would have located Sirius no matter the disguise. In fact, the ministry's entire pursuit of Sirius collapses in logic once the letter-tracking possibility is introduced. The same holds true for Pettigrew after his escape in The Prisoner of Azkaban. No elaborate maps, no patrols would have been necessary. Just a simple envelope, and the truth of his hiding place would have been revealed. Another telling example comes from the Order of the Phoenix. When Harry is forced to attend a hearing at the ministry for casting a Patronus in front of Dudley, owls are dispatched with uncanny speed. An owl swooped through the open window. It dropped a letter directly into Harry's lap. The immediacy with which the ministry delivers correspondence shows that magical post is not constrained by ordinary barriers. It transcends distance, walls, and secrecy. The irony is heavy. The ministry uses this efficiency to summon a teenager to court, but not to track Death Eaters or safeguard its citizens. The oddness of the letters even extends to Voldemort's reign. During the Second Wizarding War, the ministry falls under Death Eater control, yet no one appears to harness Owlpost as a weapon. The regime uses snatchers, patrols, and lists, but never once employs the same force of magical correspondence that once found Harry in a hut on the sea. Either the system is jealously guarded by Hogwarts, or Rowling overlooked the wider implications of her own invention. Either way, the inconsistency leaves the careful reader uneasy. Hagrid's arrival on the hut is described as triumphant, but his words contain a key detail. Harry, you're a wizard. He delivers the letter in person, almost as though the hundreds that preceded it had been an elaborate show designed to wear down Vernon's resistance. Why so many? Why not simply one owl, one scroll, one knock at the door? The spectacle is excessive, and yet it reveals the persistence of the tracking spell. Harry could not be hidden from his fate. If this were applied to fugitives, they too could never hide. The comedy of the letters suddenly acquires a sinister undertone. It is also worth noting how personalized the addresses are. Not only the cupboard under the stairs, but the smallest bedroom reflects a living awareness of Harry's environment. The letters are not just locating him, they are observing his conditions. They acknowledge his oppression, his shifting status within the household, even the room where he sleeps. If the magical post can perceive such intimate detail, then it borders on omniscient surveillance. The wizarding world is thus presented with a tool that sees into homes across oceans through disguises. The ethical implications are staggering, yet no character ever pauses to question them. Rowling, of course, employs this narrative device for drama and humour, not for realism. The letters storming through the chimney provide a thrilling climax to Harry's childhood confinement. But as readers grow older, the logical puzzle lingers. If owls can find anyone, why must the Order use complicated charms to hide Harry at the beginning of the Deathly Hallows? Why deploy a dangerous Seven Potters scheme when a single owl could betray the real one's location? The existence of magical correspondence undercuts many of the series' later tensions, leaving us to wonder whether Dumbledore and the Ministry consciously ignored its potential, or whether the rules of magic shifted silently to suit the plot. Consider the fate of Regulus Black, who dies in the Cave of Horcruxes. His disappearance goes unnoticed for years, his sacrifice hidden even from his own family. Could not an owl have revealed his resting place? The magical postal system has the uncanny ability to expose secrets no matter how carefully veiled, and yet the story never applies it outside the opening volume. It vanishes like a conjured object once its role is complete. For attentive readers, the silence is louder than the letters themselves. Thus the image of the letters is not only charming, but unsettling. It shows us a world where magic can pierce walls, cross seas, and find individuals without error. A world where location is never safe from discovery. For Harry, it meant liberation from a miserable childhood. For the rest of the wizarding world, it could have meant the end of fugitives, the prevention of wars, and the salvation of countless lives. That it does not raises one of the strangest and most fascinating questions hidden within Rowling's saga. Why was such power left to parchment and owls, and why did no one else ever dare to use it? Number 23. The disappearing artifacts. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, a mirror appears in the dusty classroom, one that does not simply reflect the image of a boy, but the deepest longings of his heart. The mirror of Erised, tall, ornate, and unsettling in its silent power, becomes a central object of fascination for Harry. He returns to it night after night, drawn by the sight of his family. Dumbledore eventually explains it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. But then, with the same swiftness with which it was introduced, the mirror is taken away. Rowling writes, "The mirror disappeared. People who had once come running to gaze at it found only a wall." After this first book, the mirror vanishes entirely from the saga, as though it never existed, despite the fact that a magical artifact of this magnitude could have reshaped the struggles that followed. When readers think of the Battle of Hogwarts, they often recall Harry's frantic attempts to understand Voldemort's movements and motives. A mirror capable of revealing the truest desires of any individual could have been invaluable. Imagine Snape forced to look into it. His enduring devotion to Lily Potter would have been clear to anyone. Imagine Draco Malfoy, who could not fully hide his reluctance to kill. His desire to protect his family would have betrayed him instantly. And yet this powerful tool was left out of the narrative entirely, its potential sacrificed so that the story would not resolve too easily. The silence surrounding the mirror becomes more conspicuous with each subsequent book, where deception and hidden motives drive much of the plot. The disappearance of the Mirror of Erised is not an isolated example. The invisibility cloak gifted to Harry at Christmas during his first year also carries an enigmatic trajectory. At first, it seems little more than a clever way for Harry to sneak around Hogwarts corridors. Later, in the Deathly Hallows, it is revealed to be one of the 3 Deathly Hallows themselves, an object crafted by death, indestructible, flawless, and unique in the wizarding world. And yet, when the war against Voldemort intensifies, this extraordinary cloak is not employed in any strategic sense. Harry uses it personally to hide from view, but the Order of the Phoenix never seizes upon it as the priceless weapon it is. Even when the trio is hunted across Britain, the cloak remains a personal artifact rather than a shared tool, despite its unparalleled potential to shift the odds of battle. The Hallows themselves are written with the weight of myth. Xenophilius Lovegood describes them reverently: the Elder Wand, undefeatable; the Resurrection Stone, capable of summoning shades of the dead; and the cloak, which conceals the wearer from the gaze of death. But while the wand and the stone play decisive roles in the climax, the cloak remains curiously underdeveloped. Rowling emphasizes its symbolic significance as a mark of humility and wisdom. Harry is the true master because he chooses not to flaunt it, but she leaves its practical applications nearly untouched. What could the cloak have meant during the infiltration of the Ministry? What might it have changed during the battle in the Department of Mysteries? Readers are left with questions that gnaw at the edges of the narrative. Another striking case of an artifact that enters and exits without full exploration is the Marauder's Map. This enchanted parchment, created by James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, is capable of displaying every person within Hogwarts in real time, complete with secret passages and hidden rooms. Fred and George Weasley hand it over to Harry in Prisoner of Azkaban, and it becomes a convenient plot device to track movements within the castle. Yet even this tool, astonishing in its complexity, is inconsistently used. During the darker years of Voldemort's resurgence, when Hogwarts itself is under threat, one might expect the map to be wielded as a critical surveillance instrument. Instead, it fades to the background mentioned in passing until it serves specific narrative needs, such as showing Draco Malfoy in the Room of Requirement. The problem with such magical objects lies in their narrative weight. Once introduced, they create expectations. The Mirror of Erised, the Invisibility Cloak, the Marauder's Map, all of these suggest avenues that the heroes could exploit, ways to outwit the enemy or uncover the truth. But Rowling's story often depends on uncertainty, on Harry's partial understanding of events. If the mirror had been accessible, Harry might have understood Snape's loyalty earlier. If the cloak had been fully recognized as a Deathly Hallow, Voldemort's obsession with the Elder Wand might have played out differently. If the Marauder's Map had been constantly employed, secrets within Hogwarts would have been much harder to hide. To maintain the suspense, the artifacts are quietly diminished, their significance softened, their roles minimized. Consider the pensive, another extraordinary invention. First appearing in Goblet of Fire, it allows a wizard to store and re-examine memories, even sharing them with others. Dumbledore uses it to show Harry fragments of Tom Riddle's past, memories that become essential in understanding Voldemort's creation of Horcruxes. But here, too, lies a strangeness. If the pensive can reveal the truth of memories with such clarity, why is it not used more broadly? Could Sirius Black's innocence not have been proved through careful examination of memories? Could misunderstandings between wizards and the Ministry not have been resolved with such a tool? Rowling employs the pensive to dramatic effect in specific moments, especially in The Half-Blood Prince, but once the lesson is complete, it recedes into irrelevance. The Sword of Gryffindor follows a similar path. Discovered in the Chamber of Secrets, it is described as goblin-made, impregnated with the venom of the basilisk, capable of destroying Horcruxes. And yet, its whereabouts are shrouded in mystery until the final book. Why does Dumbledore, who knows its unique properties, not ensure it is safeguarded? Why is it left in limbo until Snape dramatically delivers it through the Patronus at the Forest Lake? The sword's sudden reappearance feels more like a theatrical flourish than the logical use of a weapon of destiny. Rowling's approach to artifacts is deeply tied to her storytelling rhythm. She introduces them with grandeur, invests them with significance, and then either removes them or limits their utility. The mirror disappears, the cloak is underused, the map is forgotten, the pensive is employed narrowly, the sword is withheld until the climax. Each time, the narrative is preserved, but at the cost of consistency. Readers are asked to suspend their disbelief, to accept that these objects simply cannot or will not be used in the ways one might expect. Some argue that this selective use mirrors reality. Even in our world, powerful inventions or tools are sometimes forgotten, ignored, or hidden due to politics, ignorance, or human error. Within the wizarding world, secrecy, fear, and personal motives often dictate choices. Dumbledore himself admits to withholding knowledge deliberately, telling Harry in Order of the Phoenix, "I cared about you too much. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth." It is possible to read the vanishing of artifacts as part of this pattern of secrecy. Yet the sheer number of such objects and the frequency with which they fade from the story suggests a narrative device more than a thematic commentary. For readers, the result is both fascination and frustration. Fascination because these magical objects feel so real, so vivid, so full of possibility. Frustration because they vanish without resolution, leaving us with the sense of untapped potential. What could the war against Voldemort have looked like if the Mirror of Erist had been used to expose the desires of traitors? What if the cloak had been leveraged by the entire resistance? What if the pensieve had been central in revealing truth to the wizarding world? Rowling's choice to sideline these artifacts ensures a story built on tension and surprise, but it also leaves the attentive reader with lingering questions. The Harry Potter saga thrives on mystery, on the shadows between knowledge and ignorance. Objects appear like whispers of forgotten magic, only to vanish into silence. They decorate the landscape of the narrative, but they do not always carry through to the conclusion. This strangeness, whether seen as a flaw or a deliberate choice, is one of the aspects that keeps readers returning, discussing, and speculating long after the final page is turned. The disappearing artifacts are reminders of both the richness of Rowling's imagination and the limits she imposed to preserve her tale's suspense. Even so, these objects remain among the most haunting images of the series. A boy staring into a mirror, desperate for the family he lost. A cloak passed down from father to son, shimmering with deathless concealment. A sword appearing in the depths of a frozen lake, reflecting the courage of its wielder. They vanish, they return, they fade into the background, yet they remain etched into the minds of readers. Their disappearance from the story is a mystery unto itself, an unanswered question that becomes part of the legend. Number 24. Dementors don't care. The Dementors of Azkaban have always been described as creatures that defy the very notion of reason, entities driven by hunger for human joy, feeding not on food but on emotions. They were terrifying guardians of the wizarding world's most feared prison, but when one considers their presence at Hogwarts in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the logic behind such a decision collapses under scrutiny. The Ministry of Magic, desperate to display control during Sirius Black's escape, agreed to let these beings patrol the school grounds. The narrative itself states, «Они патрулировали периметр замка, словно черные привидения». They patrolled the perimeter of the castle like dark phantoms. And yet, would any rational government truly allow such monsters to stalk the paths of children? This unsettling paradox is not merely a detail of the story, it is a profound crack in the world building, one that forces readers to question whether safety or political theatre guided the ministry's choices. The danger becomes immediate when we recall what happened on the Hogwarts Express. Harry collapsed after the first direct encounter, while Professor Lupin rushed to drive the Dementor away with a Patronus. Here lies the central absurdity. If the ministry truly intended only to secure the castle from Sirius Black, why allow their guards to enter a train full of children utterly defenseless against the soul-draining presence? The official narrative would claim necessity. Yet, from a deep logical standpoint, this was reckless endangerment of minors. Hermione Granger's horrified reaction, as well as the stunned silence of other students, underline how unnatural this event was. Dementors cannot distinguish between guilty and innocent, and here their indifference nearly cost Harry his life before the school year had even properly begun. Another glaring inconsistency rests in the idea of trust. The Ministry entrusted Azkaban to these beings for decades, despite knowing their complete lack of loyalty. Professor Dumbledore himself states, "They will not remain loyal to the Ministry. Fudge ought to know that." His words serve as foreshadowing. And indeed, by the time of the Second Wizarding War, the Dementors had sided with Voldemort, lured by the promise of free hunting. Grounds. If their betrayal was so predictable, then why place them in positions of authority in the first place? This contradiction transforms them from effective guards into unpredictable predators. It is as if the wizarding world willingly handed over its security to creatures whose nature was to undermine it. The Hogwarts setting makes this contradiction sharper. A school is meant to protect, to educate, to shelter. But during that year, the air around the castle thickened with despair. Cold drafts swept through corridors, and even Quidditch matches turned into life-threatening experiences. Harry's fall from his broom during the match against Hufflepuff was caused by a Dementor swarm, not by Sirius Black. The supposed protectors endangered students far more than the alleged fugitive ever did. Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff seeker, tried to stop the game out of fairness when he saw Harry fall, but the sheer fact that a magical sporting event was invaded by these creatures shows how misplaced the Ministry's priorities were. They did not seek to safeguard Hogwarts, they sought to make a show of dominance, and the cost was the mental health and physical safety of children. There is also a psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. Prolonged exposure to Dementors causes depression, hopelessness, and in some cases even insanity. It was no coincidence that Professor Lupin, a man already burdened by his condition as a werewolf, recognized how damaging they were to students. He went so far as to secretly teach Harry the Patronus charm, an advanced form of magic that students would not normally learn until much later. This decision by Lupin was not simply a favor, it was an act of necessity, because the Ministry had placed Harry, and by extension every child, in constant danger. The fact that only Harry was given this tool of defense highlights the absurdity even further. Why should only one boy have the means to repel such creatures when all students were exposed? The deeper we look, the more this decision by the Ministry resembles negligence cloaked as authority. Cornelius Fudge appeared on the surface to be ensuring security, but the truth reveals something else, an attempt to use fear as propaganda. The Dementors served as a living warning, a reminder that the government was in control, even if that control came at the cost of terrorizing schoolchildren. By maintaining their presence at Hogwarts, the Ministry communicated not safety but submission, turning the grounds into a political stage. This explains why Dumbledore opposed their presence so strongly, though even he could not entirely prevent it. His protests fell on deaf ears because the Ministry needed a symbol, and the Dementors were a spectacle of power. The absurdity heightens when considering that Dementors themselves are not invulnerable. A skilled wizard with a Patronus could drive them off. Dumbledore alone, with his Phoenix Patronus, could have kept the grounds safe without risking the students' sanity. Yet the Ministry preferred creatures that could not be reasoned with, could not be commanded through law, and most importantly, could not be trusted. This raises a haunting question. Was Azkaban ever truly secure, or was it always one breath away from collapse? Sirius Black's escape, after all, was not foiled by the Dementors, but enabled by their inability to detect animagi. Their infamous vigilance failed at the one task they were supposed to fulfill.